My name is Caleb Dow, Senior Product Marketing Manager here at Introhive. I'm excited to be joined here today by two special guests from Forrester, Vice President and Principal Analyst Anthony McPartlin and Senior Consultant Erich Desai. And as I mentioned, we're here today to discuss the total economic impact study that Introhive commissioned Forrester to conduct on our Introhive's Customer Intelligence Platform. Before I hand things over to Anthony, I'll cover off a few of the typical housekeeping items. This session is being recorded and a copy will be shared with everyone following the close of the webinar. You can access the total economic study itself on the right-hand side of your screen under the resources section. And feel free to drop questions in the Q&A box throughout the session today, and we'll be saving some time toward the end of the webinar to take those questions. So with that, I'll hand things over to Anthony.
Thanks, Caleb. So before we jump into the kind of the details of the TEI itself, the total economic impact, what I wanted to do is to provide a little bit of context on why this area of relationship intelligence has become important in B2B sales, and maybe what the external factors are that's driving its prioritization within sales organization. And central to that is the fact that B2B buying has been going through some pretty radical change in the past few years, and clearly the pandemic accelerated a lot of that in terms of buyer behavior and preferences. But a lot of these changes were already beginning to take place prior to that. And I think what everybody on the call is aware of is that buying journeys are a lot more self-guided today. Buyers are educating themselves through your website, your content, through third-party content and websites before they engage in interactions with you or your competitors. And the number of these self-guided and personal interactions throughout that buying journey is going up, with the average number of interactions during a buying journey now 27, up from 17 in 2019, based on our recent surveys. And these interactions are happening across more channels. They're also happening with a broader set of stakeholders in the buying group, with more departments being represented in the buying decision. And I think anyone who's tried to get software licenses approved in the past 6 months can probably attest to finance's renewed interest in these types of areas. And the data from our B2B Buyer Insight survey highlights that 60% of B2B buying journeys now have 4 or more participants. 75% of deals now have executives as decision makers, and 51% have finance as decision makers as well. So these changes are creating a challenge for B2B organizations. Do they have visibility into engagement with buyers? Do they know who these buying groups are made up of? What are their preferences for engagement and content? What do they value in engagement with us that differentiates us from the rest of the pack? And the reality is for a lot of B2B organizations is that they've limited insight into buying groups and their engagement with us. Of those 27 interactions that I mentioned, the buyers are having across their decision journey, selling organizations on average they're only capturing 5 of these in their CRM systems. And we kind of know why that is, right? There's 2 primary reasons. The sales organization typically doesn't have a lot of insight into the types of self-guided engagement that's happening much earlier in the funnel, like first and third-party intent. But even more importantly, the tracking of engagement with buyers has been placed on the shoulder of frontline or admin resources. And that's creating a lot of inefficiency and pretty high costs for what are expensive resources. And at the same time, it's hampering data quality and then the adoption or the ROI from technology and CRM investments. So if we move to the next slide. Yeah, so in the current tighter environment, this stuff becomes even more important. At any time, getting revenue from existing customers is always easier than finding new ones. And I think that's especially true now as organizations they're trying to figure out, how do I maximize these relationships? How do I understand how to deliver more value to these parts of the organization by improving or orchestrating the buying experience so I can deliver more value. And at the same time, organizations are having to do more with the same or less resources. So they're looking for ways to boost productivity and reduce some of that non-value added activity that has always been part of the seller's daily activity. So those involved in selling need the ability to accurately capture what engagement is going on, with whom, across these buying journeys, so that they can analyze what's working, what isn't, and then use those insights to improve engagement, improve orchestration of that buying journey, and the revenue engine itself. And one final point to make here is that those same tighter economic conditions, that they're placing increasing scrutiny around tech purchases. And the reality is that sales and marketing organizations have been splurging on tech in recent years, and a lot of that has been driven by aggressive growth targets that they've been set. But a lot of that investment, based on what we see in our engagement with clients, has not always been that strategic. It's been relatively ad hoc or reactive, trying to fill gaps in capability or strategy. And at the moment, harder questions are being asked about the ROI of some of these investments, about their ability to support some of the core technology investments in some of the bigger platforms like CRM, and their ability not only to drive the adoption of a specific tool itself, but the wider benefits in terms of the full tech stack and the tech stack's adoption and integration. So I think it's pretty timely for us to share some robust approaches to assessing technology investment. So with that in mind, let me pass things over to my colleague, Erach, who's going to walk us through this total economic impact study for Introhive. Erach?
Thank you, Anthony. That was a great background and perspective, a big picture perspective on the industry side of things. Good day, everyone. Again, my name is Erich Desai, and I'm with Forrester's Total Economic Impact team as a consultant. I was the lead consultant on this TEI study, collaborating with Anthony, and also with my colleague, Eric Hall, who collaborated on the TEI side of things. Before we get into the results, I just want to take care of two sort of housekeeping disclosure issues. One is we're giving you a quick overview in today's presentation of the findings and the results. You really get the full context from reading the report. So I'd encourage you, it's on Introhive's website, and today is just sort of some big takeaways, but to get the full flavor, you should probably read the report. Second, in terms of process, the custom names were provided by Introhive, some of their leading adopters, of course. And we want to stress, however, that Introhive was not on the calls that we conducted with the interviewees. And furthermore, Forrester had full editorial control of the content of the TEI, and Introhive was not able to change any of the metrics or the findings that we did. So basically, first, let's talk about what is a TEI, because some in the audience may not know that. This is the first 3 pages of the TEI study to whet your appetite. And again, the findings of the report are detailed in what is called the total economic impact of Introhive's Customer Intelligence Platform. Anthony played a critical role in the interviews, in reviewing the model, in reviewing the draft of the study. And so he will add some color commentary as we go through the next set of slides, in addition to my play-by-play. So for those of you, again, not as familiar, and I'm just going to do a quick overview. Companies have been coming to Forrester for over a decade to try and basically provide us an independent confirmation of what we are hearing from our customers in the benefits that they are deriving from our products, typically in technology. And our studies go beyond sort of the total cost of ownership or ROI, even though we feature an ROI in our studies, to share the journey of the customers. And also we have a lot of risk adjustments and all that along the way. And in terms of process, the process will become a lot clearer just as we go through the findings. But just as a quick overview, again, we meet with Introhive. We have discussions with their key stakeholders to be better knowledgeable about the product and their customers. Then we have the customer interviews. As we said, we interviewed 4 customers in this case, 4 individuals, one individual at each different firm. And after those interviews, we develop a financial model for a representative organization that we call a composite organization. And I'll talk about that shortly. So in the study, we dive into the details of the financial results as well as the stories and the quotes from the customers. And we call this really, the TEI is really the voice of the customer, so to speak. So as I mentioned, we interviewed 4 firms that Introhive introduced us to. There were 4 companies in the professional services sectors, broadly speaking. They all had different kind of business models, different focus areas. It just so happened that they all happened to be professional services companies and versus, say, product companies. And it's interesting because those are the companies that rely much more on relationship selling rather than just sort of reputational selling per se, product, read the product brochure or whatever. As you can see, the revenues range from under 400 million to more than 30 billion. Employees range from 750 to more than 100,000. There's geographic distribution. In terms of the types of people we spoke with, they were pretty diverse too, but generally fell into the buckets of either leading up marketing or leading up platform CRM technology. So, as I mentioned, part of our discussion with the customers starts off with, what was your journey? What were your pain points? What led you to evaluate and assess this technology, in this case, Introhive and perhaps others, and then decided to go with Introhive? It's not a competitive analysis. It's more what was going on with you before you decided to engage and deploy Introhive. And just for context, we had people who've been using Introhive for the past 12 plus months, going back all the way to 2018, at least the 4 that we interviewed. As I said, Anthony joined us on a bunch of these calls, almost all of them. And maybe you can speak, Anthony, to what were the pain points that resonated with you sitting in your seat?
Yeah, thanks, Iraj. I think the items that you see here, I think, are pretty consistent with a lot of what we hear, not just in those interviews, but more broadly when we talk with clients at Forrester around their investments in technology, their challenges in leveraging technology for productivity, and in trying to drive return on investment. And if you look at some of these here, right, the fact is that, most B2B companies, their customer data strategy is built on the back of their frontline resources. And it's not really a recipe for success. They don't like doing it. They're not very good at doing it. There's not a lot in it for them. It eats up a lot of their productivity, etc. And, one of the CMOs that we spoke to during the interviews talked about the fact that it's not just about automation of previously manual tasks that were time consuming and error prone, but it's also about giving some control around how the activity or the insight gets assigned, so that, ensure that it's going against the right account, the right contact and opportunity.
Perfect. And now let us basically transition into the specifics of the Introhive study. So we mentioned this notion of a composite organization, so let me briefly talk about that. we create this organization, which is a blend of the characteristics of the companies we interviewed. And it's not an average at all, but represents an ideal customer that can help us, therefore, build a financial model. So we get very specific when we speak to the company, in this case, our client, Introhive, and say, we're going to define a composite that has a certain number of revenues, 1 billion in this case, certain number of employees, what sector it's in. And in this case, just because of the nature of the companies we interviewed, it had to be in professional services. So it's a global B2B organization, sells professional services to 20,000 clients. And just for the modeling purposes, we made an assumption that the Introhive platform is adopted/deployed at the rate of 67% in year 1, 85% in year 2, and 100% in year 3. So you'll see the benefits rise over time, sort of pursuant to that kind of ramp. So Forrester found the following 3-year benefits for the composite organization. And the big takeaway from our study basically is, even though we say let's not focus on it, is that the return on investment is 495%. I know Introhive had the first slide saying that too. And to add some color here, recently at Forrester, to get an Introhive, to get an ROI over 500, you pretty much need an act of God. And I'm exaggerating, of course, but that pretty much means I have to sit in front of a committee of people and really justify. And this has been a recent change in the last 12 months or so to avoid what we call ROI creep. So you'll hear me repeat throughout that we were conservative in the benefit quantification because I didn't want to go in front of a committee to try and justify why this one company out of X deserved more than 500 ROI. So the benefits derived in terms of present value in today's dollars are 13.7 million. You take away, again, the present value of the cost, and we come up with a net present value of 11.4 million, again, for this representative composite organization. Anthony, did you want to talk a little bit about just the overall results and the quote here?
Yeah, so I think, you know, when we look at the quote here in particular from the customer involved, you know, we've observed over the last couple of years this kind of explosion in technology around sales. And, you know, there's been a lot of various technologies added to a seller's daily activity, their daily efforts, but it's a relatively, you know, fragmented experience from the seller's perspective. You know, they have to jump from one tool to another, and it's not only a drain on their productivity, but it's not a great experience, and that impacts adoption. So, you know, for that transition to happen, you have to deliver more value to the seller in the CRM, because the reality is the perception of a lot of users is, and I think rightly, that many of the core CRM platforms up to now have been, you know, pretty poor at delivering value or a great user experience for frontline resources. So, you know, any tool that brings new insights to sellers, but also improves their use and their perception of the core tools and the core CRM platforms creates a win-win scenario for them as frontline resources, as well as operations and leadership.
And, you know, I think one thing, Anthony, worth mentioning, I mean, I assume that the audience is somewhat aware of what Introhive does, but to just make it very crystal clear, you know, Introhive is not replacing your CRM in any way. It complements and enhances and provides greater value add for your CRM. So just wanted to make that clarification. So this slide summarizes the cost part of the analysis that I referred to, right? And we're not going to get into the details of this. Suffice it to say right here, which is we use pricing information that's provided to us by Introhive. We asked them for list pricing based on the configuration of the composite. And again, on the way we sort of looked at the deployment over the 3 years. And then we also estimate what are the costs of deployment and ongoing support based on our discussions with the customers. And we come up with a representative set. Your own costs may end up being lower than this or higher than this. So really, it's something for you to figure out. This kind of mix, 60-40, is pretty consistent, we find, for a SaaS kind of application. And again, sort of summarizing the same points, but more graphically, I guess, over the 3 years and sort of over the initial investment or the on-ramp period. We basically, what I would say here is the payback period for the Introhive investment was less than 6 months. We don't get more granular than that. Introhive asked us to be more granular, and we said our SOP is, we basically say 6 months or less. So getting a little detailed, and we're going to take baby steps into this. For the composite organization, I'll keep repeating that, we were able to quantify these 3 benefits. I may occasionally say 4 benefits because we actually came up with 4 benefits, but we quantified 3 of them, and I'll explain the odd one later. But we basically, these are calculated in present value and fully risk adjusted. Very briefly, the largest one is the benefit accrued to to the composite organization from net new sales that are generated. And of course, we convert all of that into net income because the sales dollars don't equate the full value. It's the net income to the organization. So that's sort of the big one. The second one is cross-selling. So cross-selling to existing customers, the revenue opportunity from that distilled down to the net income level. And the third benefit, it's actually an important one, is the productivity gains for, in this case, the non-revenue generating, the marketing, the business development, the CRM technology platform people. And that's actually pretty significant. Anthony, how did you feel about this relative mix of how they quantify, on a percentage basis for a professional services company as opposed to perhaps a product/technology company that might be adopting Introhive solution?
Yeah, Iracha, I think for the kind of business model we're talking about here, this looks right to me. And obviously, it's going to look quite different depending on your business model, your level of market penetration, or your stage of organizational maturity. So for example, startup and high growth organizations are usually pretty highly focused on acquisition of new logos because they're just building up that client base, and they probably also don't have at this point a lot of scale in terms of things like non-revenue generating resources. So what's interesting though when you look at this is that I think that impact on non-revenue resources is an area that is to some extent overlooked in B2B and in conversations around the ROI around tech. So we're always thinking about frontline productivity, but what this indicates is that there is in some areas of B2B and business significant time and cost being burned elsewhere in the organization in supporting frontline resources and the tools and the platforms that they need to find, win, and grow customers.
Thank you. So I'd like to actually say that beyond the dollars and all that we've discussed, these are the metrics that actually matter. And perhaps more important than that for the audience, these are the kind of metrics that you might be able to utilize for your organization, because you're going to have a different number revenue number. You're going to have a different number of employees, a business model, as Anthony said, what you sell, how you sell it, what is your pricing model, etc. But translating, these were sort of the core metrics that drove the dollar numbers for our analysis. So we'll be going into all of them in somewhat of a detail, but I would just want to emphasize, if you want to come back to one slide, this was an interesting one where you can basically better relate to your organization. So I'll use the non-revenue generating professional productivity as an example. So our analysis from the interviews basically showed that this improved the productivity by 7.5%. How we got there is from the interviews, we learned that marketing, CRM, and business development professionals were spending 5 to 10 hours per week on manual and laborious stuff related to data entry into the CRM. And that was reduced down to 2 to 4 hours. So that's like a savings of 3 to 6 hours. We were conservative. We said 3 hours a week. And we assumed a compensation level and then applied on top of that what Forrester calls a productivity capture. Basically saying, if you save an hour of time for a professional, that's not 100% of work generated back. It's 60% in this case. So 7.5% is probably a whittled down number. You can probably get more, but that should give you a little flavor of how we build these things out and how conservative we end up being. So I'm going to talk about this quote briefly, and then Anthony will talk about the next one before we get into the nitty-gritty for benefits. But if you look at this quote from the global CRM manager for an international law firm, identifying key relationships allows us to get our foot in the door earlier than our competitors, leaving us better positioned to win. I mean, I also love the car engine analogy. If you're an EV fan, you can use the battery analogy, but nonetheless, a powerful statement.
And then thanks, Arach. Here, I think the focus really is on less the technology, but more, the other elements of the relationship with a technology provider like Introhive. And I certainly spend a lot of time talking with clients about different providers in different tech categories, and there's always a lot of focus on functional requirements and capabilities, features. So we try and encourage organizations to think beyond the purchase, to consider the long-term fit of a provider, with the kind of goals and objectives that they have as an organization. What's the provider's ability to support adoption and the development of that platform over time? What guidance can they give at different levels in the organization, and how flexible and responsive can they be in meeting our needs and ultimately their potential for strategic partnership?
Great. So let's dive into benefit number one. And because this is the largest benefit, let's talk a little bit about it. So with customer relationship insights, there was a two-part impact of this. The composites qualified new opportunities are uplifted, and again, the details are in the report, from 9 qualified opportunities per year per revenue generator to 12 per year per revenue generator. We found this to be conservative, but there's a full impact of that by year 3 of 33% sort of uplift. And then with capabilities like briefing intelligence and a lot of other details that Anthony and the Introhive team can speak to, I'm not a specialist in the technology. The baseline win rate also improved for the customers. So if the baseline was 25% win rate, we boosted that by 3 percentage points 28%, 5 percentage points, and 8 percentage points as the learnings and, of course, the further deployment occurred. And the combined impact is basically saying, okay, by year 3, net new revenue is boosted by 82%. So that's sort of the headliner for year 3. Bear in mind what I might have said earlier, just it bears repeating. We take that revenue impact and we put a net income on that. So that's down at 15 to 20%. I forget the specific. And then we apply a 20% risk reduction. So said another way, we say Introhive can be attributed with 80% of this value rather than the full 100%. That's what's reflected in the model. And again, a lot of numbers here, but I'd always like to put things in perspective and sort of do a sanity check for ourselves, right? In year 3, the composite is supposed to do 1.1 billion in revenues. That's what we've assumed with a little growth from 1 billion in the first year. They were supposed to do 33 million of net new revenue without Introhive. With Introhive, it's going to be 60 million by our analysis. Okay, 3 to 6% of the overall revenues. We're not saying that Introhive boosts new revenues by 50% growth in the overall business. So it's pretty reasonable. Anthony, anything to add to this quote or this overall benefit?
Yeah, so I think many B2B companies are reliant on outbound engagement to drive new business, and it's expensive and it's time consuming. Companies are buying and burning through lists of prospects, and they're facing the reality of pretty low conversion rates because they're struggling to identify who should they be prioritizing for prospecting and who is in an active buying cycle. And the analogy I often use is that it's like fishermen heading out on trawlers into the Atlantic from Maine or Nova Scotia or even the west coast of Ireland. So how do they know where to fish, right? They switch on the radar. And when it comes to acquiring new logos, most B2B companies don't have their version of a buyer radar that tells them where to focus their efforts and how to focus those efforts. And one example we heard in the interviews for the TI was that having something as simple as a pre-meeting digest landing in a partner's inbox, for example, on the morning of a meeting, and then being able to review that, to scan through it, to get a sense of a whole range of different insights, it kind of changes the game for them because it's giving them another angle to talk to the client. It's providing a way for them to differentiate themselves and to kind of build some credibility, that they understand the prospect's business, that they understand their context.
That's great. I love the way you kind of threw in so Anthony's comes to us from Ireland. Introhive is on the east coast of Canada. I'm coming to you from Boston, so interesting. So the next major second benefit that we quantified was about revenue generated from existing logos, right? The first one was about new logos. This is about existing logos doing other business, so the cross-selling of other services in the case of this composite. So Introhive enabled interviewees to uncover white space opportunities within customers' organization and exploit invisible connections. Again, a part of the technology that is enabled through Introhive. And the chief marketing officer for a professional services firm, actually, they had done some pretty detailed analysis. So we spent time with them on the interview and in some follow-up as well to make sure that we kind of understood it and we could extrapolate from it. So in their case, they had studied it for 9 months. They had a plan for the next 15 months of where they thought the cross-selling rate would improve to. We started at a much more conservative baseline, and then we said, okay, the baseline will improve due to Introhive by 10% in year 1, 20% in year 2, and 30% in year 3. Once again, we reduced revenues to the net margin level, and applied a 20% risk reduction factor. And I'll go back to sort of giving you the numbers in perspective. By year 3, the composite was assumed to generate 56 million in cross-selling revenues by itself without Introhive. And with Introhive, it's boosted to 73 million. So again, seems very reasonable, not out of the ballpark at all. And Anthony can elaborate further on what he has to say about the cross-selling aspect.
Yeah, thanks, Arach. So one of the big benefits that a platform like Introhive provides is insight into engagement health in existing relationships. So how often are we talking to key stakeholders in the organization, at what level in those organizations, about what? And, one of the companies that we spoke to correlate, or they're correlating this information with the outcomes that they're seeing to try and understand what's working. And they talked about the importance of seeing where the client relationships are improving or whether they're going backwards and where they need to take action, and being able to do that on an account by account basis. And that's kind of a real changer for them.
Great. So this third one in this case is going to be the one that we did not quantify, and we've kind of highlighted that. So the productivity impact for revenue generating professionals. And Anthony, I think, mentioned what we normally think about with these kind of technologies is how does it help the salesperson? And obviously it does. And in fact, this came up repeatedly as we interviewed the 4 customers, the impact of the time savings for the revenue generating professionals. In this kind of composite and the customers we interviewed here, you do have the unique situation that the partners who deliver the services also end up doing a lot of the selling, and there are additional salespeople as well. So why did we quantify it and why did we not include it? We quantified it because it was important and it mattered. And our analysis, again, being conservative, as I sort of outlined, showed that it improved their productivity by 2.5%. Again, we can get into you can read the report for some of the detailed thinking behind that. But the reason we, in our review process, felt that this would be a double count is to say, well, where do the new sales for net new logos and cross-selling come from? We're assuming that's with the existing sales force that has more time and opportunity to do additional selling. So by including this dollar benefit, we were probably going to be double counting. So what do you want? Do you want the revenue impact or do you want the productivity impact? So we said it's worthwhile in a box carve out to talk about the value of this. And if for whatever reason your organization cannot quantify the revenue benefit, just based on this benefit, you can probably justify your investment. Anthony, did you have something to add to this?
Yeah, so I think, as a sales operations professional and as
Right.
somebody who is guiding other sales operations leaders, productivity is kind of the primary focus for sales operations teams. Excuse me. And I think, our primary purpose is to try and reduce non-value added time for frontline resources so that they can, focus their efforts on maximizing the time they spend selling and engaging with customers and prospects. And excuse me, I talked at the start of the call about how in the current environment, getting more from the resources you have is obviously critical. And the research that we do at Forrester around sales productivity shows that, on average, only 27% of a rep's week is being spent directly engaging in sales conversations with prospects and customers. And one of the reasons for that is the amount of time that they spend doing admin like logging activity in CRM. So what this shows is that taking that admin burden off the front line works and has a significant impact on growth and performance.
Excellent. In the interest of time, I'm going to walk through this a little quick. I've already given you a flavor of how we came up with a 7.5% for the non-revenue generating professionals, right? I think that was indicative. There were two aspects in the calculation that we did here in this $2.5 million, for example. The second part was how these pre-meeting briefings that are generated by Introhive and then perhaps enhanced by an organization, they automate a good deal of the data gathering and the market intelligence. So the CRM manager for an international law firm, they're not on this page, said something like, we generate comprehensive customized reports, I'm reading here, that typically used to take us over an hour to run and look at multiple different data feeds, etc. We can now get that information within about 5 seconds and download a report that's literally on a mobile for a partner. Anthony, do we want to skip ahead and just go on?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, perfect. So the other thing that our studies do is basically look at things that are things that we couldn't quantify. I talked about the productivity of the sales generators that we could quantify, but there are things that we couldn't quantify. The CRM and the value derived in leveraging the CRM is one of them, and I'll talk to that in the next slide. The other two that are worth mentioning are the data quality, and that sort of goes hand in hand with the enhancing the value of the CRM, right? The quote on this slide is basically, it's so poignant because this firm basically studied it and said they achieved a 97% data accuracy for what's captured in their CRM thanks to Introhive. The third one is speaking to GDPR compliance. And if I were to quote the head of the platform for a commercial real estate firm, it gives us business justification for why we're able to hold someone else's data in the system, because Introhive shows that there's an active relationship or connection with that person. So let's dig into the improvement in the CRM adoption. So we actually tried to quantify this benefit. We spent some time trying to think carefully about how we could do this. 3 of the 4 firms that we interviewed gave us hard data, provided us hard data because they were so happy that because of Introhive, their CRM adoption increased, some by 2x, some by 20x. Okay, so we're sitting and struggling and saying, how could we potentially quantify this? Because obviously this justifies the investment in the CRM. The problem is the CRM platform providers charge on a per user basis. So it was not a simple calculation. And even though I'm a math geek and I love modeling, I wasn't able to come up with something that could reasonably show that. So we sort of said, let's just highlight it and talk about it. And the bottom line is sort of articulated from the CMO at a professional services firm. This enables better client intelligence and focuses our business development efforts. Anthony, so before I mention, bring Anthony in, the other part of our TEI methodology is to speak to the notion of flexibility. How does the solution allow and enable flexibility for the organization? And Anthony's going to speak to that.
Yeah, I think I'll speak specifically to that point around, turning sales reluctance into opportunity, especially when it comes to tech, right? Sellers tend to hold on to what's theirs pretty tightly. There's competitive benefits for that. So there definitely needs to be, some, I would say, sensitive discussion with frontline staff about what the quid pro quo here is for sellers. What tools like these are going to enable them to do better, to increase their own performance by focusing in them on the right types of deals and engaging in the right type of activity that drives success. And so there also needs to be clarity around how management intends to use the data. So if you want to use it to beat sellers around the place, I think that might not be the right approach. But using it to identify strengths and weaknesses across the sales teams, gaps in processes and messaging, and providing targeted coaching on the back of that is where some of these customers have been taking their lead from and using it to kind of change that dynamic and the perception within the sales force.
Great. And we've gone over the time that we plan to speak. We'd like to obviously answer some questions too, but to wrap things up, here's a quote from the chief marketing officer of a professional services firm. And, I think it just speaks to the overall after the sales support provided. And just, I have to say anecdotally, all of these customers love Introhive, love the team, love the support. And it's like they have been with us and ahead of us every step of the way. It's very powerful. Well, Caleb, turn it back to you.
Absolutely. All right. Awesome. So before we move over to the Q&A portion of the session, I just want to say thank you to Erich and Anthony and the whole Forrester Consulting team, not just for your time today, but also for your partnership in this entire process. As Anthony shared at the start of today's webinar, visibility into client relationships and interactions has always been a challenge for organizations, but it's actually becoming widely accepted that it's a practice that's really an imperative, especially in times like we're in today. With that said, its value has historically been really difficult to quantify until now, thanks to this study. So again, thank you, Erich and Anthony, for all the work you put into this study. And I also want to say thank you to our customers who participated in the study. I'm sure some of you are actually on the session today, joining us today. It was really eye-opening to see the innovative ways that you're applying Introhive to your business and the resulting impact that it's having on your business. So thank you very much. And so now for questions. So we'll move over to the Q&A panel. So the first question here, my firm is in a different industry. How could we expect our results to differ from what is shown in this study? Erich, do you want to take that one?
Yes, definitely. I'm going back to my sort of, if you recall, there was a slide, it's number 18, but obviously let's not bother bringing that up, but it's the metrics. And even as you reading the TEI study, besides the dollar number of the benefit, look at some of the green boxes where we capture the metrics for each of the benefits. The 7.5% increase in productivity for non-sales, the boost in cross-selling, and again, use your baseline and then say, okay, improve that by the percentages or the percentage mark that we felt was fair, and then look at that from that perspective. And so that will allow you to cross industry, cross product, cross the cycle or the phase of life you're in. As Anthony said earlier, if you're a young startup, it's new logos. It's not about cross-selling. So cross-selling will be less of an impact. New logos will be much more of an impact.
Yeah. One other point there, Caleb, I think is around the level of influence that your sellers have in the process, right? And that can differ depending on your context. So, some contexts may be high in terms of relationship influence. Others may be more kind of at the order taking level. And so that obviously clearly has a big impact.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you both for your input there. The next question, this one's directed at Anthony. In looking at the study, what do you think are some lessons for those that have responsibility for procuring go-to-market technologies like Introhive?
Yeah, so I think I said at the start that technology investment in go-to-market functions and certainly in sales, based on what I've seen in the marketplace and talking with a lot of clients, it's been pretty reactive and somewhat ad hoc. So I think there's a question there around being more strategic in your management of your tech portfolio, and being certainly a lot more robust in assessing the impact of the various technologies that you have, and being able to demonstrate to the organization the value, how it's contributing to business outcomes. And I think, the TEI provides a kind of a pretty robust approach for doing that. And organizations may not, go to that level of depth, but they have to start to take a more structured approach to demonstrating impact from these different technologies. And instead of relying on anecdotal support from, frontline staff or, that type of thing, which, or adoption, for example, or completion of training, those types of, qualitative metrics that are important, but probably don't, buy a lot of credibility with CFOs, etc.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thank you. One final question here. Do you have a counterfactual example of outcomes for a professional services firm that has not adopted Introhive? For example, what is happening at firms that have yet to adopt Introhive or something like it?
Wow. That's that's an interesting question. I'll try it, and maybe Anthony can add to it. I think it would speak to one. You probably are dealing with a lot of messy data, data that cannot be relied on in your CRM. It relates to the productivity of both your frontline salespeople as well as the people supporting the business development marketing efforts. And bottom line, it therefore means you have selling opportunities that you're leaving on the table because you're of all those things and the intelligence that comes from a platform where you're able to explore white space, relationship insights, and all the stuff that Anthony understands much better than I do.
Yeah, I think the reality is that technologies like these are still quite nascent in a lot of B2B organizations or a lot of B2B categories and segments of the market. And, when I talk to clients, across a pretty broad spectrum of industries, they just don't have insight into what's going on in an engagement. And given the types of changes that I talked about earlier on in the presentation, that really leaves them pretty hamstrung in terms of being able to be responsive, to be able to orchestrate a better buying experience that, buyers are demanding. Never mind all of the stuff that Eric talked about, right, in terms of the internal impact it has on expensive frontline resources. So, I think that's what's driving this. Now, what we find generally is that awareness of that problem or a lack of awareness of that problem, particularly amongst sales leaders, is something that where the penny hasn't really dropped yet. And we've been spending a lot of time educating our clients in sales leadership around, what is sometimes a kind of a forgotten problem, and it's one that they really have to start addressing if they're going to try and optimize their revenue engine, if they're going to try and get more from the resources that they have and drive better performance.
Fantastic. So we've only got 5 more minutes, but we only have one more question. I think we can sneak it in. I think this one might actually be a little bit related to that last question around the counterfactual example of outcomes. And the question is, Anthony, a lot of the benefits seem to be resolving issues that a CRM is typically purchased for. Is this normal? And I think that's related in the fact that some firms might be operating with a CRM and a CRM alone without visibility into relationships. So, Anthony, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, look, that certainly was the promise, right, of CRM and Salesforce automation, that there would be automation. But the reality is that there hasn't been a lot of automation. There hasn't been an integrated user experience. There hasn't been a lot of productivity tools for sellers to help them get more from their day and their week. And so, as a result of that, we've seen a situation where a whole new kind of breed of sales tech categories have emerged in the last couple of years that sit on top or that may be natively integrated into CRM. and where for some the CRM platform is almost the back end, and that certainly wasn't the original intent, right? But because of gaps in capability, gaps in experience for users, and gaps in terms of requirements from frontline sellers and from operations and leadership, these types of tools like Introhive are filling important gaps that just haven't been an area of focus for the larger CRM providers.
Awesome. Thanks, Anthony. All right, everyone. So that concludes the webinar for today. I hope you found it informative. And for those who want to download the study, you can find a copy toward the right of your screen in the Resource Center. Keep an eye out in your inbox for a recording of the webinar. Thanks again for joining, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.